Welcome back, everyone. I believe, yep, we got the right number of people on the list of attendees. So reminder to keep an eye out on polls, doing a great job on that. You should have 2 evaluations. You'll get 1 more, so you'll have 3 by the end of the day. And don't forget the exam briefing at the conclusion of the last, like at 5:15 Central. So Dave, you are set and ready to go. So I'm signing off. Except you're not on the mic yet.
Okay, can you guys see me and hear me? Yeah, I don't know why, for whatever reason, when I plug in my earpiece to charge, it it disconnects. So at any rate, so it only took me 4 or 5 times to figure that out. So now you know why IT is not my strong point. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the methods for risk financing. So in the very simplest of terms, oh, you know what, I just wanted to mention to you, Rich brought up as he was closing out the morning session, don't forget the instructor, evaluations. You guys have a million things on your mind. Okay, I completely understand that. So don't worry about the employee or the evaluations. I'll take care of all of those for you. Okay, so don't worry about it. All right. So piece of cake. All right. So let's jump into risk financing. I'm kidding, of course. Okay. So in the very basic sense, right, risk financing can be insurance companies sending the bill to the insured in a lump sum, okay, for annual prepaid installment, all right, single pay. So that's the most simple approach on a guaranteed cost, right? Rate times payroll, and then if payroll has changed, then maybe an adjusting invoice at the end. Now, where we're going to go from there is there a better way to finance that process? So again, before we dig into it, just looking at the overall picture, if you increase the deductible, premiums go down. Right? That's another way of risk financing. Okay? Reducing claim frequency, right, by spending money on loss control services. Another method of risk financing, taking money out of one bucket, putting it in another bucket to hopefully get a return on that investment, which in the end would be a savings. So that's kind of the process that we're headed towards. So our goal, our participants will explore simple risk financing options and delve into the mechanics of each plan. This will include a focus on the key characteristics of risk financing, their practical application, and the comprehensive analysis of the pros and cons of each plan. These are our objectives, and I've said before, make sure you can, feel comfortable with what is being said here and how to respond to it. We're going to describe the features of the 3 basic financing options: guaranteed cost, which we discussed already, a dividend, a deductible plan, and when to apply each within an organization. Now, depends on your role, all right? So if you are agent or broker, okay, when to apply each within an organization. Really, whose decision is that, right? I mean, that's kind of the buyer, the customer, the prospect, whomever, all right? But it's clearly your expectation to provide, examples, not so much examples, alternatives, okay? Product A, financing product A, financing product B, product C, and so on. Okay? We want to explain the features of retrospectively rated plans and determine okay, when they are best suited for organization. So on a retro plan, okay, there's a few steps in that. And so it's a type of a program which, if it's got a good match for the customer, you can clean up on these things, all right? But you know, there's a little bit involved. They're a long-term program, all right? So if the shoe fits, great. But if the shoe doesn't fit, okay, don't try and make it fit, all right? Otherwise, it'll be like, you know, pair of shoes with a marble in it. Okay, so describe the features of self-insurance plans and determine their appropriate application within an organization. So the simple plans are guaranteed or fixed cost. Okay, and again, we talked about the fixed cost, right? It's really talking about a fixed rate, right? And that's really the only component of that. Schedule credits, tax assessments, um, um, all of which remain fixed, okay, in terms of a rate. However, the cost will vary based upon exposure changes. A dividend plan, a deductible plan. Now, under all of these, the insurance carrier, they run the show. The only thing that applies to the insured is, do I get a savings or not? That's essentially what it comes down to, right? So guaranteed cost, okay, it's rate times payroll or exposure equals premium. Dividend, if you do well on your losses, you get some money back. Under a deductible plan, if you do well on your losses, okay, you get more money back. So we'll get into the degree of sensitivity for each of those. Organizations that are unable or unwilling to assume internal financing often select a simple risk financing plan. However, when considering these plans, the areas of internal financing that are often overlooked and which require financing are losses outside the four corners of the insurance policy. Okay, in other words, the oops, I didn't realize we didn't cover that. Losses in excess of the purchased limits. Okay, that's also a bummer. Okay. Losses subject to excluded perils, hazards, and property definitions, and losses limited by policy definitions, limitations, and conditions. Now, recognize that under the fourth bullet point here, losses limited by policy definitions. Some terms, key terms, are in fact not defined. All right, so be careful of that. I suggested earlier on a book, and actually, as I talk about that, I'm wondering if I have it here and I can show you. Let's see. Actually, I don't, sadly, but on our next break, I'll look it up from Ermi and give you the exact title on it. But again, it's one of those books that you will use from time to time, and when you do, it's well worth, like I said, the $40 or $50 that it costs. So be careful of that stuff. Okay. Evaluating simple risk. Whoop! Wait a minute. Here we go. Sorry. Wait a second. What? Oh, I guess the advancing format has changed. All right. So, all right. Describe the features of the three basic risk financing options: guaranteed cost, deductible, and dividend. All of these are fully insured, okay, and deductible, what's contemplated here is a small deductible plan. Plans offer significant stability, okay, meaning the worst case scenario is you're building that into your cost, but it's a one-sided advantage. So if you do well, you get something back. If you do poorly, it's no worse than what was quoted. Again, setting aside changes in the exposure. Premiums are calculated by multiplying rate times the exposure, adjusting for the workers' compensation experience mod, if applicable, and applying any scheduled credit or discretionary credits. Right? Organizations with a low risk appetite, limited capacity to manage services, and a preference for minimal variability. Remember, preference. That's where the conversation with the customer takes place. What do they prefer? Okay. That vendor that I was talking about for the food and beverage, I just couldn't get my head around that kind of money that they were paying for something that wasn't tied more to their risk profile, or appetite to a more sensitive program. But these plans transfer all risk to the insurance company, which provides 100% of external financing up to the policy limits, subject to its terms and conditions. These plans offer minimal loss sensitivity from the insured's perspective, unless a higher deductible is selected for a premium reduction. Once the premium is paid, the insured has no further financial obligation, again, except for the premium audit. Premiums are deductible when the obligation is incurred for accrual basis accounting systems and paid when cash basis accounting system is applied. Losses are deductible only to the extent the insurance policy does not pay, okay? And the insured incurs it. All right. So remember, if you haven't paid any of the loss, but it's just a reserve because nobody has final numbers yet, can't deduct it. Not until it's time. Insurance company, on the other hand, can. Fully insured plan. Okay, so pros and cons. All right, so you want to know these pros and cons. Let's hit a couple of these. So the pros, right? High level of certainty. Company knows the policy cost. Services that come with the insurance policy provided by the insurer. Be careful of this one. Sometimes insurers, represent they're going to provide all kinds of services. Once they get the money, the only time they do the services is when they go out prior to the renewal and then hit the insured with a handful of mandatory recommendations. And if they don't get complied within a month, okay, as an example, rates go up, right? So be careful of that, right? Make sure that you get your loss control services that are contemplated in the plan, okay? And so just as a question, and I'm truly interested in this, if somebody is selling a guaranteed cost program, we all know that there's some level of loss control services that are expected with that. When you get a quote from an underwriter, do you then ask the question, what does this contemplate for hours of loss control services? Yeah. Or is that just kind of a topic that remains silent? Right? I'm just curious. Oh, okay. Monica says they're part of the proposal. Okay, that's good. All right, I'm glad to hear that because really that becomes a check and a balance system. If they're part of the proposal, you want to be sure that those find their way to the insured and the insured takes advantage of them. It may be an issue of you needing to sell or promote the loss control services that are paid for, built in, or contemplated within the premium, okay? And make sure your insured gets the benefit of that, okay? Okay. Oh man, Charles, okay? Listen to this. I work for a life sciences carrier. The hours are included, okay, at no limit. Oh man, I love that. One of the first times we had a renewal with our one of our insurers, was the lead casualty. They threw in as part of the proposal 100 hours of loss control. Okay, and so I'm looking at it and kind of pulling that apart, and I'm thinking to myself, well, we're about as diverse a company as you can imagine. And so I'm looking at that and going, man, 100 hours, okay? Yeah, this isn't going to cut it for us. So I went back to the underwriter through our broker and said, hey, we want 350 hours. So we want an additional 250 hours of loss control. And again, I kid you not, underwriter goes, okay, I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure how to charge you. Okay? And I'm thinking, wow, what a book of business you must have that nobody buys additional loss control services. I was really kind of shocked at that. So at any rate, but Charles, I do love that, hours are included at no limit. Man, that's awesome. So, because we actually have a life sciences company as well, pharmaceutical robotics, okay? And again, that's as weird as they come. So the disadvantages, it's absolutely the most expensive option, because if you do well on losses, well, who benefits from that? The insurance company, right? And I got to tell you, I've never in my life gotten a thank you note from an insurance company saying, hey, we were budgeting for, um, 2.5 million in losses. You came in at, 90,000. Okay, thanks. You saved us a boatload of money. Never got that. So know those pros and cons. All right. And remember, for the advantages, share those with your insured. Insureds are sadly conditioned into what's the rate, okay? What's the exposure, maybe, all right? And what's the total cost? That's it, And at the end of the day, okay, yeah, that's kind of part of it, but it's really incumbent upon us. And when I have to, carry the flag up the ladder, I've got to be able to talk about all that stuff. All right. Now, here's another one here that's pretty interesting. Improved loss experience does not yield immediate rewards. Okay. Yeah, exactly. The only way you're going to see a reward on improved loss experience is the mod. Okay. So like 2 years later, okay, you may see an impact on that. Maybe 1 year later on a renewal rate, okay, but more likely it's going to be 2 years, because the underwriter is going to say, hey, how do I know last year wasn't a fluke? You were just darn lucky. Okay. But if you've been using the loss control services, the loss control engineer should go back to the underwriter and say, hey, they're doing, A, B, C, D, and E. They're doing it well, and that's why their losses are low. Then the underwriter can say, oh, well, there is a specific reason why that's happening, not just dumb luck. Okay. And as an agent or a broker, that's incumbent upon you to dot those I's and cross the T's. This is what the insured's doing, verified by the loss control people, and it sits on the underwriter's desk for schedule credit or whatever type of a program they're on. Okay. Oh, and supplemental services required will be purchased at additional expense to the insured. If we have to reach out for specialty services, whatever those happen to be, okay, boy, do I make it a point to communicate that to the underwriter, because if it's not raised to the underwriter's attention, they may not know, okay, that 3 of our claims people all come from law firms, okay, not attorneys, but they come from law firms for bodily injury claims, so that's different, and sometimes underwriters, when they realize that, and we put their resumes as part of our renewal submission, okay, so that underwriters know we don't goof around on that stuff. Okay, so dividend plans, okay, it's a guaranteed cost, which if you have some good losses within brackets, for example, if losses are less than 5% of the premium, you get $1, a few bucks back. If they're 10%, you get more money back. If they're 20%, you get more money back, but then that's usually capped at some dollar amount or percentage amount. All right, so that's usually kind of the safest approach. Remember, dividends are not guaranteed. So you can go out and you can talk about all the pros and the cons of the different plans, and you recommend a dividend plan. And if your losses, and this is part of your pitch, if your losses are 10% or less of the premium, okay, you will get, $15,000 back. Okay. Well, let's say that year the industry is a hard turns to a hard market, and the board of directors for the insurance company says, you know what, we're not declaring a dividend this year. Ooh, now you're in a bit of a pickle because you've sold the product based upon, okay, the assumption that the dividend will apply. And it does so long as the board of directors of the insurer declares a dividend. All right, so be careful on that one. Okay, flat versus sliding scale. I described the flat, okay, excuse me, I described the slide, which is return premiums come back in the form of a dividend based on a percentage of losses. Now, on a flat dividend plan, okay, if the premium is, as an example, 100 grand, then a flat dividend, again, remember dividend, not guaranteed, might be 5%. So the underwriter says, no matter what the losses are, okay, I'm giving you a 5% dividend, okay, at policy expiration. Or, maybe it's 3 months after the expiration, 3 months after the premium audit, who knows, all right? But point being, it's a fixed dollar amount based upon the estimated and adjusted final premium, okay? There, we just talked about this difference, okay? Know the pros and cons of a flat versus slide. Maximum cost is fixed, okay, after the audit. Dividend plan can be seen as loss-sensitive arrangement with no downside risk. Downside meaning additional cost. When the schedule provides generous reductions for a favorable loss experience, the insured has a real incentive to to reduce loss. And think about this. We go back to that phrase, skin in the game, right? So if you're an insured and your premium is X, no matter what, okay, do you have an incentive to build in or implement a stretch and flex program, okay? Because you're having people with, sprains and strains, okay? Well, maybe not. Okay, we had a division, this real scenario here. We had a division that was comprised, these were fuel oil delivery people, okay? We have fleet of, I don't know, 800 units, 800 trucks, thereabouts, okay? And these are large deliveries. So this isn't going from house to house. This is going from, industrial users. And so most of these guys are 55 and up, smokers, drinkers, okay? Probably, wouldn't know a vegetable if it hit them in the face, all right? So that's kind of the population. And we were getting sprains, slips, strains, I don't know, 7 a week, maybe. This was a 24-hour operation, 7 days a week. So we would say, I would say probably 7 a week. So what we were thinking was, let's develop and implement a stretch and flex program. So the first 15 minutes of every shift, okay, everybody did a little bit of, and I'm not terribly informed on the proper word, but sort of not like a jazzercise, but a little bit of a movement activity, as well as sort of a yoga activity. Basically, just everybody standing around in lines, stretching, right? So the first time, and of course, I thought this was a wonderful idea, okay? Patting myself on the back for the brilliance that I had on this idea. So the first time that we did it, now again, I told you we had about 800 trucks, okay? So that's 800 drivers, and we were gonna do it for each shift, all right? So I don't know, 200 per shift, ballpark, okay? So the first shift shows up, okay, with 4 people. And I'm thinking, oh God, this is a failure beyond even my wildest expectations. Second shift, okay, 3, maybe 4. So I'm thinking, okay, this is a disaster. So I was driving home, feeling completely and totally dejected because I still thought it was a good idea. And so then I figured, well, you know what? There's a better way to skin the cat. Okay. And if this is inappropriate, I'm going to apologize in advance because it's not intended to be. Okay. So I went to a local like exercise facility. Okay. And this is one of those places where at the time everybody showed up, you know, to exercise with stretch everything, stretch pants, stretch shirts, you know, all of this stuff. Okay. And it became sort of a, you know, informal fashion show within the, you know, exercise place. So I got one of the jazzercise instructors, okay, who was just one of these people that looked like they stepped out of a fashion magazine. And I'm going to guess, and I'm not very good with ages, okay, but my guess is maybe somewhere in the 20s or 30s age. So I went to her and I said, look, you know, what would you think about, you know, doing a 15-minute exercise program? Here's the population age, okay, for 3 times a day, okay, 5 days a week, okay, and we'd pay you X dollars, okay. So she goes, sure, you know, no problem, okay. So the first time she was there, okay, we had, I don't know, 5, 6 drivers show up, okay. The second shift, we had about 40 drivers show up, okay. And then the third shift, we had about 180 drivers show up. So it got around. Anyways, to the point of all of this, I told you we got about 7 strain claims per week. And I'll tell you, some weeks we had 12 to 15. All right. Each one of these things are 10 grand, you know, 15 thereabouts when you factor in the indemnity portion of the claim. Okay. So after, I don't know, maybe 10 days of this, our frequency of strains went from 7 to 12 a week, okay, down to 2 a month, okay. And it was that pronounced, and our insurance carrier actually had us do a presentation on this for, you know, a bunch of their insureds and some insurance industry, you know, whatever uh, organization. So think about these things, okay? It makes a huge difference, right? Think of be out of the box. Dividend plans typically designed for policies with premium levels that do not justify more aggressive loss sensitive programs. All right, so you know your unsophisticated customer, smaller premium, all right, is probably the shoe that's going to fit. On a small deductible plan, and this is interesting because, you know, times have changed. Small deductibles used to be under 10,000. Now small deductibles might be viewed, okay, as under 100,000. A large deductible plan might be 250,000 and up, right? So, you know, that type of terminology changes a little bit. Small deductible options are offered with almost any line of coverage, right? So we've all seen small deductibles on workers' comp. We've seen small deductibles, perhaps not as frequent, on GL, you know, 2,500, you know, that kind of stuff, right? Remember, you're still going to have a TPA fee to adjust and pay those, right? And then also small deductibles on auto physical damage, okay, which is actually quite common, all right? But you sometimes see, and not very often, small deductibles on auto liability, right? So not unheard of, but not nearly as common as the other two. One feature of a small deductible plan is a fixed premium, okay? Again, love that, but remember, fixed isn't fixed, it's a fixed rate premium subject to the premium audit. These plans can be particularly sensitive to losses depending upon the frequency and size of the claims. Okay? So when it comes time for the calculation for the amount of the dividend, okay, or deductible, and you're looking at return money, are you talking about paid claims? Are you talking about incurred claims? And if you're talking about incurred claims, the question becomes, well, You know, the insurance carrier says this claim is incurred at 100,000. Well, is it? That may be what they're telling you, right? But is that a reasonable number? Again, case in point, we had a trucking accident, major accident, included a fatality, and it was a contract driver. Okay, so one of these big, tractor trailers, with a big tank, on the back, goes through an intersection, through a red light. I mean, this driver was wrong through and through. All right, goes through the intersection, loses control of the vehicle, it jackknifes, hits, and this is in New York City, hits a building, okay, ends up kind of not going through the building, but pretty close to it, major damage. Driver's killed, starts losing the product, okay, out onto the street and down into the sewer system, right? Major environmental claim, all right? So, we're looking at all this, it's on the, evening news, the worst of everything. So the our insurance carrier hits us with the $10 million reserve on the claim. And I'm like, time out, okay? Where's the 10 million come from? And their answer was, and I can't make this stuff up, okay? I wish I could, but the response is, well, it was a big claim, and you're going to have to pay something, okay? And I said, well, and for whatever reason, I was in the arguing mood that day, like every day, okay? I said, well, when you say pay something, does that mean we're going to pay 10 million? Well, no, probably not that much. Now I got a renewal coming up, all right? So I said, well, then what's the right number? And they said, well, you're going to pay at least 5. Okay. So I said, okay. So based on this conversation, we've just reduced the reserve from 10 million to 5. Yep. Okay. Well, here is our contract with the driver. Okay. Here's their certificate of insurance. Their certificate of insurance that lists us as an additional insured has got a $5 million limit. It also includes pollution coverage, first and third party, okay, for the cargo. So the major case adjuster goes, well, we have to put something on it, okay, because we have, this is priceless, because we have to keep the claim open until the claim closes. So to try and not bore you to death, all right, we finally get to the point, okay, that the reserve goes from 10 million to 5 million to $1, okay, so that they can, within their system, keep the claim open. Okay. But this is the stuff, you get to the bottom of all of this. Does it make sense? And you got to keep digging and digging and digging, all right, until you understand and you can say to yourself, yep, that makes sense, all right? So again, let's see, quick question. Okay, yeah, so a little off of this particular subject, got a response here from Monica. Okay, we have credits for cyber and use them to get experts to provide training to our members and insureds. Okay, yeah, good stuff. All right, and here's the funny thing with cyber. Okay, we do the same thing. Okay, but cyber has got 2 parts to it, a cyber policy. The first part is damage to your electronic stuff. All right. So somebody sends, and it gets into your system, a malicious virus, and it's destroying all of your records. They're your records, and they're destroyed, wiped out, whatever the reason. Right? The other part of the coverage is third-party coverage, which covers the insured from a claim by a third party for your loss of their data. So in other words, I've got a customer, I've got their account information in my system so that I can send them money as needed for whatever reason. Somebody gets into my computer system, gets their account information, either puts it on the internet or they take money out of the account. Okay? Or, I somehow obtain, as part of doing business, personal information from people. Maybe it's even my own employees. Name, address, phone number, social security number, age, date of birth, those types of things, right? And I think the criteria is 3 points. Any of those three is considered a breach of personal information. So that's going to cover me for the degree of my negligence. The funny thing is with cyber is a lot of underwriters sell it as a package. Okay? Here you go. All right. Well, from my perspective, I'm okay with self-insuring damage to my data. I'm okay with that. That's a risk that I'm very comfortable in absorbing. However, and underwriters will have told me, well, and when you get the they don't know how to do it. So my response was, look, I want to self-insure part A, and now on part B, and some of our contracts require a 25 million cyber limit. Okay. And I'm like, who came up with 25 million? I don't know. Sometimes it gets cut and pasted out of other things. But doesn't seem to be any logic in that. So I go to them and say, look, all right, I want to self-insure A, and on B, okay, I want a fully fronted policy, 10 million limit, a 10 million deductible. So you're providing, insurance company, 15 million limit, X of 10. And for that, charge me a premium. Okay? Perfectly logical approach. And they just look at you and they kind of shake their head and go, it doesn't work that way. Here's the quote, right? And I'm like, it violates really the basic principles of insurance. Never risk more than you can afford to lose, okay? And so what I've got is underwriters that lack sophistication in large account pricing and risk taking. Yeah. So that's what I find with a lot of the cyber, Monica. Okay. So characteristics of small deductible. We want to know these characteristics, okay, and be able to sort of, rattle them off the top of your head. Okay? So not a whole lot of cash flow. Again, rate times exposure, okay, divide by the installments, you're done. And number 2 here, the most significant cash flow advantage arises from the payout lag. So if you have installments from the insurer, okay, that are interest free, well, okay, that's nice. Okay, so you don't have to pay out all the money up front. Now, most of our program, I'm sorry to say, most of our insurers require payment in full within 10 days of binding. Okay, so we, on our renewal date and for the first 2 weeks after that, we shell out a ton of money. Okay, and then the rest of the year is, unusual endorsement modifications and claim payments. So insurer handles all related services, including claims management and issuing certificates of insurance. Now, from my perspective, okay, claim management from many insurance companies, many, not all, can be problematic because, sadly, and I know this firsthand, okay, when we first got our claims department up and running, insurers, would look at us and sometimes not return the call. They were adversarial. And, I just came right out and said, look, we're not here to compete with you. We're here to help you because your boss, adjuster, okay, has no idea that we exist. And when you look at, when it used to be an adjuster's desk, now it's their, computer terminal, okay, they would have a stack of open claims of 200 claims. And it's a number that is absolutely impossible for anybody to do a good job, ourselves included. So we would tell them, look, okay, we're here to help you on all of these that are ours, okay? And that gives you more time to work on other stuff. Okay. It enables you to look like a shining star because you get all this stuff done. Okay. And your boss is going to look at it and say, wow, you do a great job. The other thing that we do with adjusters, all right, is we give out Starbucks gift cards. Okay. A $25 gift card. And you have an adjuster that answers the phone at 5:30. Okay? You have an adjuster that calls us back before we call them for follow-up. These are kind of like crazy little things, all right? But you'd be surprised, this really makes life a whole lot easier. I mean, it really does. And so a lot of these, again, like a $25 gift card, you would think you just sent, a check for their kid's first semester in college. All right. And I'm thrilled that they take it as, hey, thanks. Okay. We had an adjuster on a asbestosis claim in Louisiana, and it had all the makings of potential litigation costs. Okay. And clearly the broad approach of the plaintiff's attorney, okay, was the hope we were going to throw 100 grand into the kitty, and then they take their 40% of that, okay, hit and run, okay, and done, and then on to the next insurer. Well, I'm not really like that, okay, and so we chose to fight it. Okay, and we found a specialty adjuster, um, ironically, in Louisiana. Okay, so the insurer puts, I think the demand was 250,000. So they put a reserve on the file for 250 because that's the demand, right? And I'm talking to this adjuster, okay, who sounded like she was 12, right? So I'm thinking, oh God, this is, I'm not feeling warm and fuzzy. So, and I'm moderately proficient in asbestosis. And so we're talking back and forth, and I'm thinking, wow, this lady really knows her stuff. Okay. So I was feeling better at that. So I don't know. I want to say 6 months later, I get a note, okay, saying, the hearing is coming up. Okay. And do I want to attend? And I said, love to. Okay, I love that stuff. All right. And so, at any rate, a week before the hearing, okay, um, I get a notice saying that claim was closed. So I'm thinking, oh God, they paid 200,000. So I give this person a call, okay, and I said, well, okay, so how'd it go? And I kind of like these IT things when I ask, can you hear me? I'm standing there or sitting there with the phone up to me with my fingers crossed. And she goes, yeah, we settled it for 5 grand. And I'm like, what? You mean 50,000? No, 5,000 plus expenses, which were another 7,500. Okay. And which is very uncommon for me. I'm speechless. Okay. So I said, well, okay, how did you do it? Okay. And she just lays out this plan. Okay. And I felt like I got hit by a car. Okay. And for somebody who sounds like they're age 12, she became a bulldog. Okay. And just soup to nuts, ran right through the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, I, wow. All right. And so at any rate, I was so impressed. Okay. I talked to one of her associates and I said, look, okay, I know this is going to sound weird, but um, one, can you give me some details about her? Where does she live? Because we want to get her, a gift card like at a local restaurant or something. So I got that information. I sent a gift card for $150. Okay, dinner for two, and I sent it to her, and I sent a note. Stupid me. Okay, to her boss praising her. Okay, on what a great job she did. Okay, lo and behold, okay, and again, I can't believe, I did this, but she has to send the gift card back to me because they're not allowed to accept them. And I'm like, are you serious? The claim's over with. It's done. So if I want to do this, it's not like it's influencing the claim because it's done and over with. And so at any rate, I then reached out to her associate again and said, look, okay, told her who I was, and she goes, oh God, your letter was the subject of our last, employee meeting or something like a month ago. And I said, okay, well, that's great, but help me out here. Okay. I want to send her this gift card. Okay. Can you give me your home address? Okay. So I sent her the gift card by FedEx to her home address, and I had to sign it, your favorite neighbor. Okay. So, if there's a will, there's a way, right? But it just gives you an idea of how closely sometimes you have to manage this stuff. And, a little bit of gratitude along the way can make a huge difference. Okay. So I can't emphasize that enough. Okay. So let's see. Note here, the insurer's services may not be well suited to the specific needs of the insured. A lot of times, small accounts have loss control people that are just out of training class. Nothing wrong with that, okay? But you need to identify that and recognize, maybe some of their recommendations are not appropriate, okay, based upon application to real life versus coming out of a textbook. Okay, so we had a question here. Do we hire public adjusters? Are you mandated to insurance carrier adjusters? So Tara, it depends on the circumstance and it depends on the geographics. All right. So for many insurers, we are approved as a TPA. Okay, for only our claims. All right. We don't always invoke that opportunity, all right? But because we are, and again, nothing formal on that, okay? Because we are, it gives us a little bit more latitude with regards to feedback and dialogue with the specific adjusters. Now, for foreign claims, a lot of times, yes, we do use independent public adjusters, namely because we need the expertise, okay? Real claim. We installed some water softening equipment, and this was in the UK, or Denmark. I don't know, one of them, somewhere over there. And we get the bill in, or the estimate for the damages, and I'm looking at it like, this just doesn't make sense. Okay, so we get a public adjuster out there, and we interview these people, okay, to see whether or not they really know their stuff, only to find out, okay, that part of the restoration quote for the damage included the relocation of a staircase, okay, and I'm like, well, why should that be the case? To make a long story short, not my strong point, so I warn you. The long and the short of it was a historic home, and this guy wanted to relocate the staircase because of his preference. Okay? And so a public adjuster really dug into it, and the local expertise recognized it was a historic home, and just the paperwork alone to move the stairwell from one place to another, again, just the paperwork was like $8,000, okay, with permits and approvals and all this other stuff, plus the construction. And he was trying to stick us with that total cost. So sometimes public adjusters can be a great help, but from our perspective, sometimes the additional cost associated with a public adjuster, maybe 5 or 10% of the loss, okay, is a cost that we would look to avoid because we can do that stuff in-house. Right? So, but again, sometimes you need local expertise. Okay? Large deductible is relative, okay, typically refers to 100,000 or more. Insurance carrier issues the policy. They do it all. I just have an obligation to reimburse them subject to my deductible. Key difference lies in the insured's ability to negotiate a significantly higher deductible along with a substantial premium reduction, all part of the renewal process. Let's see. Okay, characteristics of a large deductible plan continued. Large deductible is negotiable is. Let's try that one more time. A large deductible is negotiable. Right? So yes and no. Usually large deductibles are in brackets. Okay, 100,000, 250, 500, a million. Now, can you get something in between? Sure. All right. And maybe that's the part that's negotiable. But by and large, people tend to stick to the pre-established packets, okay, or brackets. And remember, the way you're going to choose the bracket is loss stratification. You should be by line of coverage, running loss runs and stratify them. How many losses do I have between 0 and 50,000, 50 and 100, 100 to 150, and so on. All right. And then that allows you to forecast what you really think is going to be the upcoming year and what deductible makes sense based upon the savings that you get. Okay. So part of selecting the attachment point involves determining whether aggregate protection is needed. Well, yeah, okay. Remember, an aggregate protection is an option, okay? And that usually comes with a fixed additional cost. So the aggregate protection of whatever the dollar amount is, you'll get a quote, and then in addition to the quote, if you want aggregate protection of X dollars, the AP is 50,000, 90,000, whatever that number is. Okay. So, and again, up to the insured to decide whether or not they want to do that. I did share with you, we do not purchase that coverage for 30 to 40% of my annual premium for an exposure I have never encountered. Okay. I'm okay with that risk. So pros and cons of large deductible and programs. Know these quite comfortably. Okay, on a large deductible, okay, the potential for great cash flow. Okay, and why is that? Because if I have $100,000 deductible, and for the first 6 months, my highest claim is $4,000, and that's possible, you know. Well, I'm not paying my standard premium. I'm paying a greatly reduced risk transfer fee of premium, but then I'm only paying out $4,000 in losses. Which is a great program. Now, a call just came in. You may be losing me. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So at any rate, so be aware of that. All right. You know, it's important. All right. But remember, just as the outcome can be a great cash flow, if you have a couple of significant claims early in the season, okay, or early in your term, that can be the result of really bad cash flow. Okay. So there was a retail store in our area, and it was a guy that sold suits. Okay, and this was back when, you know, most people wore suits. And his commercials on TV would hold up a suit, and he'd introduce himself in his store. Okay, and he'd go, you know, one of the things that makes a good quality suit, and he'd point out things on a suit that he was kind of holding up in front of the camera. Okay. And it was really an interesting learning process because he would talk about like weird little things that suit manufacturers did that if you knew you were buying a no-name suit, but it was actually made by, you know, a very popular and high-end suit company. Okay. And so his motto was always, you know, at ABC Company, we believe the educated consumer is our best customer. Okay. So remember, okay, the educated consumer is going to be your best customer because it demonstrates to them you know enough about what you're talking about to look out for their best interest. Okay? So collateral. This is a little bit of a wormhole. Collateral can be your best friend or your nightmare. You need to understand, if you are talking about a large deductible program and you're selling this to somebody, you must understand the principle of collateral, how it works, and how it's calculated. Because if you rely on the underwriter to calculate the necessary collateral, you are at their disposal. Okay. And, you know, an insurance company is a for-profit organization. Okay. They do not have the fiduciary responsibility an agent has to their insured. Okay. So there's not really an equal playing field there. We talked about collateral a little bit. In the case of a large deductible plan, the insurance carrier is obligated to pay all the losses, okay, including the ones that are in the deductible, okay, and the ones that are above the deductible. And I think we're all on board with, of course, they're going to pay for the ones above the deductible, all right? But statutorily, the insurer is on the hook for $1 up to the deductible. So if I stick it to the insurance company, okay, they're probably going to be on the hook. Now, the way the insurance company manages that financial risk is they're going to require me to post, you know, financial collateral, accessibility to my cash in case I stick them, okay? They can get that money and pay the claims within the deductible that they're obligated to pay. Okay? So we talked about the forms of collateral: bank trust, letter of credit, surety, cash, okay? Those types of things, all right? Those are all acceptable forms of collateral. The other is how much collateral. Once the collateral dollar amount, okay, or the exposure to the insurer is determined, okay, they will then come and present to you a percentage of that. So the insurance carrier says, well, okay, the reserves are, you know, 500,000, and we want the insured to post, okay, 50% collateral. So that means I got to come up with 250,000, 50% of the reserve, okay, to protect the insurance carrier. Okay. Now, when they come up with the 500,000, who says that that number is correct? So does the insurance carrier, okay, and as we start to get to the end of this segment, here's the question to you guys. Okay. Does the insurance company profit or put in a preferred position by overstating the reserve? So if one number, if their number is 500,000, okay, do you have any reason to accept that, okay, as the correct number? Okay, now I know you guys are asleep. Yes, they can ask for higher collateral, should change the number. Okay, not quite, Monica. So the whole idea of the collateral, if the insurance carrier says 500,000 is the number, we've cranked our numbers and the reserves, okay, get all adjusted and valued and so on, it's 500,000. Well, if the real number is 300,000, okay, then the insurer's got an additional $200,000 of my money, okay, to work to their advantage. All right. So the way you're going to really challenge that number, okay, is to have a collateral. Okay. Now there's two parts. The key piece, okay, and the variable part is the 500,000. Is the 500,000 a correct number? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You have that number calculated independently. The agent or the broker can do that, or what we do is we use our own actuary. And I don't know, for $5,000 or whatever, you know, the dollar amount is, okay, that's a good expense for us. right? And if they come back and they say, yeah, the number should be 400,000, then we're going to argue with the insurer saying, no, okay, it should be 400. So let's assume we agree on 450. The insurer then says, okay, Dave, 450 is the amount of the reserve. We want 50% collateral. Therein lies, okay, the black hole of argument, okay, because they have a whole host of, crazy non-verifiable reasons as to why it's 50%. One, you're a private company. Two, okay, we don't really know all the inner workings of your financial decisions. Okay, I mean, these things are like all over the board and really make it very, very difficult to challenge. About the only way you can really put the squeeze on them is get an alternative quote. Okay, it's hard, but that's about it. All right. So recognize the reserve should be a numerical exercise that everybody should be able to agree upon or close to it. The collateral percentage is something that tends to be the black art from the insurance company and puts the insured at a little bit of a disadvantage. Okay. They'll also decide what type of collateral they want. LC, okay, surety bonds, okay. So whatever that is, and you're not really going to have a whole lot of say in that, right? So at any rate. All right, so I think those are our key pieces. These other couple of points that you can read on your own. No big deal on that. Okay, so let's take our break here. All right, we'll be back at half after the hour. All right, and then move on. Right?
Dave,
Yeah.
there's a really good question that let's cover it after the break. It's
Wait a minute. Let me scroll. Okay.
yeah, it's from Charles. He just came in, but let's do that after the
No,
break.
I don't. No, I don't. I don't have that. Okay.
Okay. I'll read it to you when we get back.
Boy, I hate that when that happens because I do try to be receptive to questions. Yeah. So let's jump on that when we get back. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. Hey,
Okay.
welcome back, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Dave.
Thank goodness.
Here's the question.
Yeah.
Could you explain what it means when a deductible erodes the limits of insurance and when it does not erode the limits?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the whole term erosion can apply in, I'm sorry, Charles, I do not have that on my question box. Okay. So I was not looking to ignore you. So erosion simply means, okay, deducts from, okay? So if something erodes a limit, it erodes a deductible, okay? So it can apply in different circumstances. It means applies towards. So for example, if you have $100,000 deductible, all right, and I'll use both examples. If you have $100,000 deductible and the allocated loss adjustment expense, or in other words, the additional expense targeted to a specific claim of yours, okay, you would typically want to have that included and erode the deductible, okay? Meaning if I spend $10,000 on a specialty, loss valuation or a secondary medical opinion or special invest SIU, surveillance, that kind of stuff, I want that to apply against the deductible. So in other words, I get to the attachment point $10,000 faster on that. Now, if the erosion provision applies to the limit, okay, then again, same principle, right? Whatever the costs are that are contemplated within the erosion factor, and they'll tell you, okay, for example, defense costs, okay, so you want defense costs included, okay, or at least, well, actually, I'm thinking of the claim, sorry. If I want defense costs on a particular claim, I want them to be outside the limit and unlimited. That's your ideal situation. Insurers now, because a lot of people don't really check the fine print, I'm seeing insurers including that within the definitions so that defense limits are included, okay, and do not deduct. They're included in that they apply towards the limit of insurance, not the deductible, the limit. Okay? And secondly, okay, that even though they apply towards the limit, okay, they are included within the limit. All right, so you get to your maximum insurance recovery faster, which to the insured, you don't want that. Okay.
We lost you again, David.
Okay, so you hearing me now? Okay, I don't know why that happens. That's one of those IT irritations. Okay, hopefully there's nobody on this call that is in IT. Okay, all right. So be careful of that. All right. So you want to make sure that when it erodes, it's to the insured's advantage, and when it doesn't erode, like defense costs, okay, you do not want that to erode the limit. Okay, so really important. Okay. Okay, so Monica, many carriers place defense costs inside the limits. Yeah, I don't like that. Okay. Yeah, and they're hoping that people, don't catch that stuff. All right. But defense costs should be outside the limit. All right. And However, I'll modify that a little bit. A lot of times on what I would call specialty insurance, pollution, medical malpractice, what else would be professional liability. Those are quite common. Defense costs are inside the limit, right? D&O, okay, often inside the limit, all right, and erode the limit of coverage, right? So, you know, if that happens, always argue it, but you may not be as successful on that as you would be on like primary casualty, all right? But be careful of that. So, so good question. Thanks on that, Charles. Cash and cash equivalents, marketable securities of a high quality. Simplest form of collateral are typically deposited into an escrow account controlled by the insurer. Okay, now, okay, I'm going to try not to be, you know, biased, right? But in order for collateral to be accepted by the insurer, there's usually, and I say usually meaning 99% of the time, there's a collateral agreement or a program agreement that is associated with that. And the program agreements, and it's a contract, both parties sign it, indicates how the money is to be used by the insurer, how it's to be calculated, when it's to be calculated, the dollar amount that has accumulated. So each year when you do an updated program agreement, the numbers would change to reflect the current balance of collateral. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. But I will share with you these agreements. Okay, were written in, at least from my perspective, okay, during the caveman era. They are outdated, incomplete, inaccurate. They are so in advantage to the insurer. Okay, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. Now, a program agreement that goes with the collateral, and I share this with you because it's so important, is probably the single largest valued contract a risk manager is going to sign. Okay, so for ours, we're about 9.5 million. All right, that's a big number. Okay, and the contractual terms that surround the 9.5 million is garbage. Okay, you know, I fight it every year, and it's an industry problem. Okay, and the industry says, well, this is the way it is, and it's because they don't understand it themselves. They absolutely do not understand it, and it's that can of worms that nobody wants to open. Okay, so I can't emphasize this enough. So here's an example. All right, and again, a real example. You can imagine, so here's the scenario. We sold a company, okay? Now the losses, and this was a publicly traded company, so we sold all of our shares, maybe 90% of the total shares of the company, right? So the assets and liabilities associated with that sale are all reflected in the shares, okay? This is, again, publicly traded company. Right? So no surprise there. So when we sell our shares, the financial obligation associated with open insurance claims goes with it. It's reflected in the share price. Right? It's no different than you or I having a 401k program, all right? But yet one of those companies leaves the 401k program and then we're stuck with the liabilities. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history. So now what happens, okay, is quite common and frankly is most reasonable. Part of the program agreement says, okay, in the event, okay, something happens during the policy year that results in a need to increase the collateral, the insured, I will negotiate in good faith with the insurer, to adjust that collateral. So let's say, for example, I made a product, okay, and in this particular year, I'm getting product liability claims like I never imagined. Insurer, okay, or if I buy a company even, right, and with that company come claims, the insurer has the right, a contractual right, to sit with me and say, Dave, we got a lot more claims than what we originally planned, okay? And since you bought this other company, all of their claims are coming into the program. So our loss pick has gone from X to a much higher X. So we want additional collateral. And that's, again, most reasonable, no problem on that. But there's no provision in there with how to reduce the collateral. So there's a provision if I buy a company and claims increase, I've got to increase my collateral. But if I sell a company, okay, and those claims decrease, there's nothing in that agreement that says they have to reduce the collateral. Okay, so here's the scenario that I got. Okay, and so what happened is we sell this company, and I knew the risk manager, okay, for the company that we, bought the company that we sold. All right. And, we're good conversation, know each other reasonably well. Coincidence. Okay. It was our same insurance carrier. Okay. So the company that our insurer that was the insurer of the company that we sold happened to be the same insurer, okay, of the company that bought them. So the company that bought them, their insurer, also ours, says, hey, you're buying this new company. We want to increase your collateral, okay? And let's just say $2 million, okay? And we want to increase that collateral by $2 million because, loss history shows, okay, you need more collateral, okay? We, the insurance company, have a higher risk. No problem, okay? So they agree, yep, $2 million is the magic number, right? So you would think by logic, okay, the 2 million that they're increasing the buyer's account, okay, would be offset. Again, we're talking the same exact claims. Then our collateral would go down by 2 million, right? Because we're just taking a package of claims and moving it from one company to another. Done, all right? Well, our insurer, okay, says, well, Dave, no, okay, it doesn't quite work that way, right? If you want us to calculate the amount of the reduction in collateral, we're going to charge you $35,000 for that calculation. I won't tell you exactly what I said, okay, but you can imagine. Well, maybe you can't. Okay, it was bad. Okay, and so I said, okay, now this is extortion. To get my 2 million back, they're going to charge me 35,000. None of that provision is in the program agreement. So what they're saying is that's the way it works. Okay, BS. Show me where it works. And of course they can't. So I said, you know what? To save yourself the calculation, I will agree with you right now, right on the phone, okay? Whatever the dollar amount is that you increased the buyer, because you already did that math for the buyer, I agree to that number. Sight unseen, I agree. Now, of course, I knew the risk manager. He told me what the number was, okay? And the insurance carrier says, nope, it's not the way it works. So again, this whole thing about collateral, these are big numbers, okay? It has a lot of responsibility associated with it. And the contract that governs the collateral, all insurers, it's garbage. There's enough holes in these things that you can drive a truck through, okay? So, be careful of that, okay? You always want to review the collateral agreement when you're looking at pitching, okay, a program that's going to require collateral. And if the answer from the underwriter is, oh, well, we'll get to that, and we usually don't do that until after we bind the coverage. No, okay? You want that agreement up front, okay? I'm gonna buy a new car and we'll tell you what's included in the car after you buy it, okay? And then you find out, well, wait a minute, there's no tires. Well, yeah, okay, we were gonna tell you about that, but thanks for the check, okay? So be very, very, very careful on that, okay? Huge potential problem. All right. So, and those were all that surround the directions and the management of the escrow account. Okay. CDs, again, not terribly common, but just another way of providing the financial backing and relieving the credit exposure for the insurer. LCs, okay. Now, again, this is absolutely the most common, not the most preferred, okay, but most common. Now, for a letter of credit, okay, and again, these are what they call evergreen. So it's effective, on March 11th, 2026, and will run forever until somebody says, we no longer need this, cancel it, okay? So that's how those work. But there's two parts to a letter of credit. One is the actual financial cost of the instrument, of the letter itself. And the bank usually charges, and it varies a little bit, about 1% of the dollar amount on the letter of credit. So if the LC is $1 million, okay, then I'm going to pay $10,000, okay, per year for that letter. That's it. And I pay the bank that, and they're happy, and that's that. However, okay, there's another part of the LC, okay, that is important to know, and that is if the LC is $1 million, the bank, in addition to collecting the 10 grand, okay, is going to say, Dave, okay, we want you to set aside money, okay, or some form of a cash equivalent to securitize the $1 million. Right? Now, typically that goes into a separate account, which is usually my account. Okay, not Dave Hershey's, but my employer's account with that bank. So we own it, we get the interest income, all right? But we can't touch that money because it's a 100% backing of the letter of credit. Now, the letter of credit backing, that might vary based on percentage. So let's say it's $1 million backing, okay? But you're a great customer of the bank. The bank might say, you know what? Okay, we'll only require you to set aside 80% of the $1 million. Okay, so that kind of stuff happens. But the point here is there's two pieces. The cost of the instrument, again, roughly 1%. And then the other is a carve out and a reservation of assets to securitize the LC at a percentage determined by the bank. All right, so that's that. All right, so are we okay on that? Okay. All right, good. The evergreen is simply an LLC that renews automatically and does not have to be replaced or renewed. Now, the whole principle of renews automatically, okay, is not really evergreen. Evergreen means it just goes on forever until somebody does something, okay? So LCs can be done on a renewable basis, okay, which frankly I prefer because it forces somebody to look at it and make sure that the numbers tie together with the numbers that are on the program agreement. Not always the case, but should be. The line of credit carries a small fee. And again, that was that 1% that we were talking about. Letters of credit are the most commonly used form of collateral in high deductible plans. So the other one that used to be very common were bonds. Okay, so now let's talk about that for a second, because There's a distinct advantage to using a bond. Now, if I provide an LC, okay, I'm going to pay the 1%. Okay, so that's one thing. But then, and just let's forget the percentage for a moment, just so I can do the math in my head, okay, on this. So if the LC is backed at 100%, so you have $1 million LC, the bank says, okay, Dave, set aside, certificates of deposit or whatever stuff that you have that is easily converted to cash. You set that aside and you can't touch it. And that dollar amount is going to be the $1 million. Okay, so you have possession of it, you just can't touch it. So in that scenario, I have two costs. One is the 1%, and the other is the opportunity cost of the $1 million that backs the LC, because I can't touch it. I can't buy machinery with it. I can't pay payroll, whatever it is, I can't do a thing. That's the other cost. Now, if I provide a bond, a $1 million bond, and a workers' comp bond is going to be a different rate. So let's call that 3%. Okay. So now what I have is I've got a bond, which is a promise to pay of $1 million, and I pay $30,000 a year and that hits my income statement. But on my balance sheet, okay, the $1 million obligation doesn't show up. So, okay, if I use a bond, I'm going to have a better owner's equity position than if I do an LC. So really, the desire and preference is to do a bond rather than a letter of credit. But and sometimes insurers will take a combination of them. Okay, so point worthy of discussion. So we just talked about the bond. All right. Again, they used to be the absolute staple of the industry. Okay, happened all the time, and now not so much. Accounts receivable. I almost never, well, actually, I never have seen pledged accounts receivable as a means in which to satisfy or securitize an LC or an escrow account with an insurer. Okay, just just never seen it. It is by definition a mechanism, but in practice, like I said, never saw it. So let's talk about what did we just learn? Okay, hopefully a lot. Okay, identify the basic kinds of insurance plan where the three key executives is most likely to favor, and briefly explain why each would favor that plan. Primus Industry is reviewing insurance proposals without a dedicated risk or insurance manager, relying instead upon a joint decision-making process by the CEO, COO, and CFO. Now, you talk about knowing your customer. Okay? In this scenario, okay, as an agent or a broker, you've got 3 customers. Okay. Now, in my role, I probably have 25 customers. Okay. And that can sometimes be a little frustrating. Okay. But working for the parent owner of all of those companies, I sometimes get a little less pushback than if I didn't. Okay. So point being, sometimes what should be a pretty clear, concise, and direct path from A to B can sometimes be foggy, convoluted, and zigzag all over the place. So, and that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with insurance. It just has to do with, managing people, expectations, and egos, right? And don't think for a minute, okay? I don't wrestle with egos within the company, okay? There's more to that than, you might think. So the CFO is a cautious CPA. Okay, so he's going to be a bean counter, okay, who values strict budgets and financial predictability. Yep. She knows exactly what Primus is capable of performing and is unwilling to venture into unknown areas. Yep. Excuse me, sorry about that. Okay. The chief operating officer believes progress requires taking more risk, but recognizes that too much exposure can be dangerous. He feels the company's effective loss control mainly benefits insurers, not Primus. This is a really important, statement. He feels the company's effective loss control mainly benefits insurers, not Primus. Yeah, that's an important phrase. Okay. Um, so at any rate, CEO, okay, began this career in Primus in sales, rose through the ranks, believes the company is financially strong. Okay. Now, here, does he believe it's financially strong or does he know that it's financially strong? Because financially strong by belief might be different than financially strong by the CFO. Okay. And the company should take more control of its future through not by taking excessive risks for minimal rewards. Okay, not too bad. All right. So let's go back and answer these. All right. So we all agree. Okay. Okay. Monica, you nailed it. Okay. So the CPA. All right. What kind of a plan you think that they're going to look for? The CFO. Probably guaranteed cost. Probably maybe a dividend plan. Maybe a slide. Maybe a small deductible. All right. Now, chief operating officer. Okay. Probably a smaller deductible, like under the 100,000. Okay, maybe a larger deductible program, maybe. Okay, but I'm more inclined to think he or she is going to be going to the under the 100,000. Now, the CEO, yeah, people that go through the sales end of the business tend to be more risk takers. They're probably going to be looking at a large deductible program, okay? But want to make sure that for the additional risks that they take, it's got a true proven or demonstratable benefit, okay? So FYI, right? So retro plans, retrospectively rated. So before we jump into the numbers, okay, what are we really talking about here? Retrospective, okay, meaning looking in the past. Okay, okay, fine. So would we agree in general that there's two parts to a loss sensitive program? One is the adjustment in premium based upon a change in the exposure. Payrolls go up, fleet goes up, fleet goes down, sales go up or down, right? We agree, premium audit's done, there's going to be an adjustment, right? That's one piece. So then, okay, and let's just look at it from an illustration perspective, okay? Forget the program for a second, just be thinking about this. If I have, my company, and I have a loss pick of $100,000 for the year, and I have a $250,000 deductible insurance, product. Okay, yeah, whatever it is. All right. Do we agree in concept that the likelihood of having a claim, okay, go from my loss pick of 100,000, which is kind of expected, right? Do we agree the likelihood of a loss going from 100,000 to 250, okay, is possible? And it's probably more possible than if I have a $100,000 loss pick, okay, and a $5 million deductible, right? The likelihood of the insurance company having to pay a claim when my loss pick is 100,000 and they have a $5 million deductible, pretty darn unlikely, right? You're following that logic so far? Okay. And I'm looking for responses. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, good. Because it's important, I think, as we get into this, to at least understand that rationale. So we talked about one of the adjustments is based upon the audit. Okay. Payrolls went up or they went down. Okay. So the premium portion of this is going to change based upon exposure. Now, the other piece of this is going to be, and I will describe it as the likelihood of your actual losses hitting the attachment point of the insurer. Okay, that is the retrospective portion of the loss sensitive plan. So what we're really saying here is one adjustment is exposure, once, done, and over. That's done at the end of the first year. Once that calculation is done, close that chapter. It's over. But then in prior years, we're always going to be looking back and essentially saying how close are our losses to the attachment point that we chose. The closer we get to that, okay, the likelihood of the insurer paying out is going to change. And because of that change, the insurer is going to look for additional premium. Okay? That is a good concept, I think, to explain a retro plan. Okay? So if, for example, we had a loss pick of 100,000, $1 million or $5 million deductible, we all agree, really unlikely the insurance company is going to pay. At the end of the year, our losses were 100,000, okay, right to the dollar. Nothing's going to change. But then let's say, for example, at the end of the first year, it's 100,000, so no changes. We have a bunch of claims that are still open. Year two, we look back at those claims, and you know what? 100,000 was way off. Okay, it becomes 2.5 million. Oof. Okay, so I'm going to still fulfill my deductible obligation, okay, because, you know, until those claims get to the attachment point. However, my total claims, I'm coming closer to the deductible. So the insurance company is going, uh-oh, okay, these claims, okay, the likelihood of paying out is now getting closer. Therefore, we, the insurance company, we have additional risk that we didn't plan on. Okay, we were expecting $100,000 in claims, a $5 million deductible. No way in the heck, okay, are we going to be involved? And that's a lower price than if it's likely that we're going to be involved. And that's the retro piece. You're always looking back to see what the pick was, the loss pick, what the actual is, okay, and okay, the proximity to the deductible or the attachment point of the insurance company. So that's the concept, all right? I find it helpful to understand the concept first, and then when you dig into the plans, okay, how does it all work? We want to explain the features of a retro plan. Now, retro is the slang expression for retrospectively rated. So what are the features of a retro plan, and when are they best suited for an organization? So first, a retro plan can be, you know, analyzed by either of two ways. One, we take the word for the insurance company and we either get a check or we write a check. All right, that's one method. The other is it's going to be more designed for a sophisticated company that has the wherewithal to either check the numbers themselves and the calculations or knows to ask the question and the responsibility of the agent or broker to verify those numbers. All right. So insurance policies are rated using two primary methods. prospective rating and retrospective rating. In a prospectively rated plan, the policy rates are set before the policy begins, i.e., okay, your quote. When you get a proposal, and let's just use workers' comp because it's convenient. When you get a quote, okay, it's a prospective plan. You have your payroll exposures, and again, those are going to vary. You have a forecast to start, and then you have an actual when the premium audit's done. Okay. However, the rates are set. The insurance company is telling you, Dave, okay, for the upcoming policy year, your rates are going to be X, whatever that is. Okay, X or XYZ, and so on. That's prospective. I know what my rates are in advance. In a retrospective rated plan, premiums are adjusted after the policy period based upon actual losses. Okay, so the closer we get to the insurance company kicking in, okay, they're going to adjust the premium because their risk has changed. Okay, and it's allowing costs to reflect the company's performance, okay, and loss experience. All right. Now, I'll share with you, very few people, okay, can really dive into a retro plan, understand it, challenge it if it needs to be challenged, and explain it, okay? Initial policy rates and adjustments. Adjustments occur periodically. So usually 18 months after policy inception, or in other words, 6 months after expiration. During that 6 months, two things need to happen. One, the premium audit is done, and that converts the estimated exposure to the actual exposure. Once that piece is done for that policy period, it's done and it's over. Close that chapter. However, the book is still open, and the book is going to be based upon or addressing changes in the value of losses. Okay, but remember, the premium portion, okay, for the exposure is a one and done deal. So let's know the terminology. All right. So standard premium, basic premium, loss conversion factor, okay, and tax multiplier. These are key pieces. Know these. We're going to get into the formula. Okay, in a few seconds. All right. Non-subject premium and excess premium refers to the premiums that are guaranteed cost, but do not adjust based on losses. Okay? So for example, not taxes, what would be an example of non-subject premium? Reinsurance. Okay. If the insurer purchased reinsurance through a treaty, okay, typically, okay, and it depends, but as a general note, okay, it's a fixed cost, okay, and if my losses change, okay, the built-in pass-through cost for reinsurance may not change. Okay, it would depend upon the actual deal, but that might be a reasonable example. Minimum premium. All right, so minimum premium, okay, is a dollar amount that the insurance company, the underwriter, determines that no matter what, the insurance, if you have zero losses, the insurance company wants to be sure they're going to get something, because these plans are involved. A lot of documentation, a lot of follow-up, a lot of reconciliation, right? And so the insurance company says, hey, I don't want to do this for $10,000 a year in income. No thanks. So they establish a minimum premium. On the other hand, since these are loss-sensitive plans, okay, if the insured has a bad year, there's a bus with 30 employees on it, okay, and loss happens, okay, something completely and totally unforeseen, there's a maximum. So while the impact to the insured financially will hurt, it will most likely and is not intended to make them bankrupt. All right. So, minimum maximum premiums in retro plans are negotiable. Okay, they are depend upon the loss sensitivity. Okay, and there's the excess loss premium. Okay, again, that's an option. Right, you may or may not choose to purchase it. On these types of plans, you can have it built into the factor. All right, so rather than a standalone charge, it's part of the equation, either or. Okay, so the types of retro plans, and there's two, all right? One is a paid loss plan, which means the numbers that go into the formula, okay, which is coming up, when they talk losses, they're talking about the losses that have been paid, which in almost every circumstance is going to be a lower number than an incurred loss. Because a paid loss, I haven't paid out the full value of the claim. So on a $100 claim, I may have only paid $20 and the reserve is 80. So when I'm using this formula, the $20 goes into the formula, not the 100. All right, so that's going to be good. So if you remember nothing else from retro plans, okay, you want for your customer a paid loss plan. It's going to give you the best cash flow. Okay, we clean up on these things. Okay, we typically get $50,000 to $150,000 a year. Okay, returns. Okay, on our retro plans. Okay, because again, we manage them very, very closely. So incurred loss. So on the example that I was giving you, okay, this one $20 goes into the calculation. And on this one, $100 goes in. It's the 80, the reserve, plus the paid. Okay, so that's a total of 100. Okay, now since a larger number goes into this to start with, and a smaller number goes into this one, this formula is going to likely have, well, I say likely, but it does have larger factors. Okay, and this one, because more money is going into it, has lower factors. At the end of the day, if you have an incurred loss plan or a paid loss plan, either or, you should end up at the exact same dollar. The difference is the cash flow. This is your best cash flow plan. This is your worst. Okay, but the losses are the losses. Okay, and so no matter which plan, you got to end up at the same place. Deferred premium plan. Some portion of the cash flow disadvantage found in incurred loss plans can be recovered through a deferred premium plan. In a deferred premium plan, the insurance carrier agrees that the premium payment will be made on an installment basis with the deposit paid up front and installment payments continuing over the policy term or perhaps even later. Right? Now, usually, this to me is not terribly common. Okay, it's out there. Okay, so know it. It is an option, and it really may not be that common simply because underwriters just don't use it. Because they are focused on incurred versus paid. Okay? Who knows? So depressed premium plan. I've never seen this. Okay, a depressed premium plan can also provide short-term cash flow benefits and may be available in certain circumstances. Essentially, the plan is priced by deliberately, but with full transparency, using a lower exposure base. Okay, so the problem with these, okay, is if you use a depressed premium plan, the insured, whether intentionally or not, forgets, okay, that lower exposures were used. So if you had payrolls of 500 million, and you go into a plan like this and you say, we're going to only use 400 million. The audit's done. The audit reflects 500 million, and guess what? Here's the bill. Well, the insured might not have set money aside when they should have, and then all of a sudden go, whoa, I didn't know that. I forgot. Okay, they probably aren't going to say forgot. They're probably going to say, how come you didn't tell me that? Right? So, document your file accordingly. Here's the formula. Okay, so the standard premium, that's the finish line, equals the manual rate. times the applicable experience modifiers, charges, and projected loss exposures. So that's one method. Okay, to calculate the basic premium equals the standard premium times the basic factor. Okay? The basic factor is going to come from the underwriter. Okay, that's a number that they will develop. Right, so you might be able to negotiate that, maybe not.